Thank you for doing this, Marie.
Thank you for asking. Not a problem.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Franklin Escobedo. I'm the Community Services Director for Larkspur, and I oversee the library and recreation. Welcome to our garden talk. We'll begin shortly. Marie, I forgot, were we going to take questions during the presentation or after?
Let's do it after. I think it might be a little bit
Okay.
easier after. Thank you.
Okay, and so everybody just remember to use the Q&A box or the chat to ask your questions, and either me or Joe will relay them back to Marie. So. Okay, so it's a little after 11, so we're going to get started. Again, thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm Franklin Escobedo. I'm the Community Services Director for the Larkspur Library and the Recreation Department. Today we have with us Marin Narlock, again, UC Marin Master Gardener, and Joe Jennings, UC Marin Master Gardener as well, and President of the Commons Foundation. Marie's here to talk to us about alternative lawns and how we can save water and make our yards beautiful. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Marie.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I'm just going to go ahead and leap in here. Let's see. Okay. Today, we're going to cover three things. The first is why a person would choose to replace their lawn. Second, we're going to talk about three methods for lawn removal. We're going to zero in on one of them. And then we're going to talk about how to decide what to do where your lawn was if you've gone ahead and gotten rid of it. So
Marie,
first,
I'm not seeing your presentation, so.
You're not. Well, that's odd. Okay, let me go back. Let me do it again. Do you see it now?
There we go, yeah.
Oh,
There it is.
How strange. Sorry about that, everybody. I don't know what happened. Okay. So, well, you've already heard me say the three things that we're going to cover today: why replace your lawn, three methods for lawn removal, and what to do where your lawn was. So let's start with, I hate to refer to it as this, but sort of the bad news, so some lawn facts. The first thing is that the majority of Americans have lawns, 80%, and they use a lot of land and water. In fact, they use more land and water than any single ag crop. And landscapes in general in Marin use half of our water, and most of that does go to lawns. Getting water to our homes takes 20% of the electricity in the state. It takes a lot of power and energy to move water from one place to another. And lawns actually use more water than pools. So it gives you an idea of how thirsty they are. Lawn care is also a gigantic industry. That unfortunately, because of the excess of chemicals that are often applied to lawns, ends up often polluting air and water, being mixed with lots of noisy machinery. And eventually, when these lawn chemicals get into lakes and streams, they kill or harm insects and fish. And unfortunately, this disrupts the food chain and eventually degrades our drinking water. So that's certainly not something we want to encourage. Lawns are also what are called monocultures. So in other words, they offer very little biodiversity. And what do I mean about that? I think one of the to think about that is that our gardens are our private spaces, but they're also part of the larger world, right? Our larger environment, all of Marin County and beyond. And so think about if you were a bee or a butterfly or any pollinator or bird, a lawn isn't going to be that interesting to you, right? You're going to be looking for nectar sources and so forth. So lawns do not offer much of anything in terms of biodiversity. Excuse me. And the final thing I want to emphasize about lawns is they are not low maintenance. I think that a lot of times, all of us, you know, at one point or another, we've bought a house or something, and it's the easiest thing is to roll out sod because we know how to take care of it. It's sort of a known entity, but most lawns require not only water, but trimming, mowing, you know, fertilizing, etc. And so they are not a low maintenance plant. And going along with the whole idea of the whole problem with the use of chemicals on lawns, which again is extremely common. These are direct quotes from the EPA, and I'm just going to read these very quickly. Some lawn chemicals threaten native plants by harming beneficial insects that safely control weeds and unwanted insects. I just want to add there that when we change the balance of so-called good bugs and bad bugs in the environment, we do create all sorts of problems. From many, many weeds and invasive plants coming in and then causing, having more fuel for fire, for instance. That's a big issue, to many other issues. Moving on, lawn chemicals account for the majority of wildlife poisonings reported to the EPA. Several types of cancer, immunoresponse deficiencies, neurological diseases, and birth defects have been associated with exposure to lawn chemicals. And the rates of lymphoma in pets of pesticide users are significantly higher than occurrences in the pets of non-chemical users. And I want to stress that I think that in Marin County, many of us are a little bit more knowledgeable and cautious about chemicals, the types of things we might put on our lawns. But again, we have to think about the broader environment, and many people are, whether they're in Marin or not, many people are using these chemicals. So now let's talk about drought real quickly. And it seems like it was so long ago, right, that we were in a pretty serious drought. And in fact, that period from the fall of 2011 to the fall of 2015 was the driest on record since record keeping began in 1895. And let me emphasize, and this is critically important, it's not a matter if we're going to have another drought. It's a matter of when. It's the nature of our Mediterranean climate, and with climate change that's happening, we know that they're probably going to be more frequent and more severe. So unfortunately, there's not really great news on the horizon there. 80% of California's water is used for agriculture, and I include this just as a reminder of how critically important California's water is. We are truly the breadbasket of the state, of the country, I should say. And so we really have to look at this resource as being extremely precious. 60% of the water's needs are met by groundwater in drought years, up from 40%. So what does that mean? That means that we're pulling water earth, right? All of those underground water goes up 50% in drought years, and that's significant. And what's happened because of that? In some parts of the Central Valley, the land is actually sinking by a foot or more every year, or actually affecting the surface of the earth. So just to quickly summarize, the reasons to kill your lawn are to save water, time, energy, and money, to avoid chemicals, to create wildlife and pollinator habitat, to reduce noise, air, and water pollution, and to make better use of the space. So let's talk about 3 methods to remove your lawn with the goal for those who are going to be planting, of course, to end up with soil that's ready to be planted. So let's talk about digging out your lawn first. This usually involves renting a sod cutter, and that can be pretty hard work. It could also be expensive, having to rent the equipment and so forth. And what happens here is you basically just peel off the top layer, and then you dump that sod in a landfill. It does take a long time to compost, but more importantly, or as importantly, it disturbs the topsoil. That ecosystem, the top foot or so of your soil is so critically important. I cannot stress that enough. It is like a whole living, it is a living organism. It's teeming with life and all sorts of things that we need to create healthy gardens and plants and so much more. And of course, this method also leaves weeds, seeds, and roots. So this method might be good, say, if you were going to put a patio on top. You would have to dig down a little further to have your under layer and so forth to be sure it's firm and so forth. But for just getting ready to plant it, may not be your best choice. Then there's solarizing. And in this method, you take an area, or you take a grassy area, you leave the clippings, you mow it down, you wet the area, and then you cover it with plastic, edge it with bricks, or any way you can absolutely seal it in. And when I say absolute, I use that word intentionally, because if there's any little air pockets, it's probably not going to succeed, right? You have to be foolproof with this. It takes about a couple of months to bake, and it does kill sod and it does kill weeds. Unfortunately, what you're left with was this big, ugly, dead patch of ground, right? And so again, this might be good if you're going to put a path on it or a patio, something like that, some type of unplanted area. But if you want to plant in it, you've kind of created a situation where you're going to have to perhaps haul some of that away, that dead soil, which we do not want to kill soil, and then backfill. So not optimal. So here's the method I'd like to recommend and talk about a little bit, and it's called sheet composting, also referred to as sheet mulching or the lasagna method, and you'll see why in a minute. This is free, easy, and cheap. You can use recycled materials, and it provides a healthy soil, and you can actually berm it up and plant into it instantly. So let's look and see what that looks like. Here's the little sheet compost in. So what you really need is compost and mulch. What you really need are cardboard and mulch for this process. And we're going to look at it in detail here in a second. And I just wanted to show a healthy slice of lawn lasagna, which for those of us who are wanting to take out our lawns looks very yummy. So now what I'd like to do, I have a little video that shows how sheet composting works, the process. And so here we go.
Hi, my name is Kat. I'm a landscape architect, and today I'm going to show you how to rethink your lawn the bay-friendly way. Now here's what a conventional lawn looks like. Ornamental and underused, but now lots of folks are transforming those lawns into bay-friendly gardens. These diverse and beautiful gardens will help you use less water, are easier to maintain, require less chemical fertilizers and pesticides, save energy, and produce fewer greenhouse gases. In addition, they also build healthy soil and plants. Replacing your lawn is a great opportunity to create a bay-friendly garden. You can create a habitat for bees and butterflies, start your own vegetable garden or orchard, create an urban retreat, or a perfect space for you, your children, and your pets. The possibilities are endless, and once you develop a plan, the rest is pretty easy. Now I'm going to show you how to sheet mulch. Sheet mulching is a cheap and easy way to replace your lawn. If you don't want to do your entire lawn, you can start with just mulching a part of your yard a little bit at a time. It doesn't require the use of heavy equipment or pesticides. And once you have the materials, sheet mulching can be completed in a day, depending on the size of the area you are covering. So let me explain how sheet mulching works. Sheet mulching is a technique of laying cardboard or newspaper over an existing lawn and then topping it off with wood mulch. The layers break down naturally to feed the soil with microbes, creating a vibrant ecosystem which is going to give you healthier soil and plants. But sheet mulching is also an ideal way to suppress weeds, build your soil health, and replace lawns. The best time to sheet mulch is in the fall to take advantage of the rains, but it can be done any time of the year. There are many different ways to sheet mulch, but I'm going to show you a simple way recommended by the Bay Friendly program. First, you're going to prepare the site. If you have tall weeds, you are going to want to knock them down or mow existing vegetation so that it lies flat. Then remove only woody or bulky plant materials. If you plan to retrofit your sprinkler heads for drip irrigation, be sure to flag the sprinkler heads now so that you can find them again when you're done. I'll show you all about sprinkler head retrofitting in part 2. Now, some plants are going to need to be removed before sheet mulching, such as invasive plants that spread by rhizomes, bulbs, or that resprout from extensive root systems. Some examples include blackberries, oxalis, horsetails, kikuyu, and Bermuda grass. When removing these invasive plants from around plants that you will be keeping, be careful that you don't damage the roots of the plants that you are keeping. Next, we're going to soak the area with water to start the natural process of decomposition. To avoid runoff and keep mulch from spilling over onto sidewalks or driveways, you can use a flat edge shovel to cut the lawn away 8 to 12 inches from the edge of the concrete. The soil should be at least 3 inches below the grade. In other words, 3 inches below the top of the concrete. Your excess soil and sod can be mounded away from the edges and sheet mulched in place. If you're sheet mulching a lawn, just flip the edges over so the roots in the soil are face up. If you encounter the plastic netting that came with your sod, don't worry about it. Throw away the pieces that you see. Your leftover soil and any extra plant material or prunings can be used to create mounds for plants that like well-drained soils. Many native plants thrive on these mounds. Mounds also create more visual interest in the garden by adding height and depth. All right, once the area is prepped, then you're ready to install 5-gallon or larger plants. Next, you'll add a weed barrier. It is essential that this barrier be permeable to water and air. Recycled cardboard boxes work great. You can get big sheets of cardboard from appliance stores or bike shops. You can also buy recycled cardboard rolls or use multiple layers of newspaper or burlap. Be sure you don't use plastic or weed cloth, which won't biodegrade. Remember, this is all about building your soil naturally. When you're placing your cardboard pieces down, be sure to overlap the pieces by 6 to 8 inches so the sun won't get through them. You want to starve your weeds of light. As you're working, you can rip and fold the cardboard to accommodate the space around your plants. Now completely cover the ground except where there are established plants that you don't want to cover. Cover all green lawn to keep the sunlight from hitting it. Remember, any lawn showing at the end of the project will come right back. Next, we're going to wet down the cardboard to keep it in place to make it easier to shape around obstacles. When you're done covering the existing lawn with cardboard, it's time to add a layer of compost and mulch on top. Spread your compost directly over the cardboard and then cover it with bulky materials like wood chips to optimize weed control. Adding compost will help build soil. However, if your main goal is weed suppression, you can just add the mulch and skip the compost. In total, the compost mulch layer should be about 2 to 5 inches deep. The top layer of mulch mimics the newly fallen organic matter of a forest. Good materials for this layer include chip plant debris, tree prunings, leaves, or even straw. You are going to need a lot of mulch. Typically, a smallish front yard can take 18 cubic yards of mulch. To find local sources for mulch, please see the resources accompanying this presentation. Now that you've laid down the cardboard and covered it with mulch, you're going to punch holes in the cardboard and place your plants in the soil under the sheet mulch. In cooler climates, smaller plants like 4-inch pots can be planted right into the mulch compost layer on top of the cardboard without digging a hole. Don't worry, the roots will break through the cardboard. You will want to add compost just around the root ball if you didn't already add compost on top of the cardboard. If you did, you're good to go. Remember, your new plants will require water and attention when they're young, even if they're drought tolerant. Just a couple other things to keep in mind. Don't pile materials up against tree trunks or stems of plants. This will help them stay healthy and disease-free. Especially during the dry season, small seedlings may need protection from snails and slugs that like to hide under the mulch. You can protect young trees from rodents with physical guards like metal bands that wrap around the base. So, congratulations! Your lawn has now been sheet mulched, and you've laid the foundation for a beautiful bay-friendly garden that you will enjoy for years to come.
Thanks for watching this bay-friendly presentation.
Okay, so then can move forward on the one reminder that I'd like to add that is mentioned in the video is to mark your sprinkler heads if you're going to do this process. And the reason for that is that you can use those heads to retrofit and turn it into a drip system. And this is not a difficult thing to do. But I want to give you an example of how much water you'd actually be saving. So a small lawn might have 7 spray heads on it, you know, the little pop-ups that come up and water your lawn. And running those for about 10 minutes could use around 70 gallons of water for that 10 minutes. If you were to take that lawn, sheet compost it, and put in 50 plants, which is a lot for a small lawn, with drip irrigation, which is measured in gallons per hour, you would use around 8.5 gallons of water. So you can see that over time, you'll be saving a significant amount of water. And of course, there are plants that you could install that will need water to get established, but then won't need any water at all. So you've smothered your lawn. Now what? Well, the first thing I want to say is that it doesn't have to look like this, right? I think there's sort of this mistaken notion sometimes that if you're going to take out your lawn, just put some rocks there or cover it with gravel or whatever and you're done. But that isn't the case at all, as you've already seen. But it could quickly go from this to this. And this is actually my house. And when we moved in, our whole yard was a big sweeping lawn. And we sheet composted a lot of it and did a fair amount of work and put in paths and so forth, as you can see. And it's just so much more pleasurable and again, biodiverse than what was there before. But the question is, how do you know where to start? How do you know what to put where your lawn was? And this is what I can't stress enough, is going with your objectives, is really asking yourself, how will that area be used? Sometimes we get so used to how a space has been used that we think that's the only function. But, you know, so you might need to walk in that area. You might want to sit. You might need a patio. You might need an area for your kids to play. It doesn't necessarily have to be lawn, right? You might need to just create a new entry. So many, it's just such classic conventional landscaping is to, you know, right in front of a house, put a lawn, right? It's not in keeping with our state, with our Mediterranean climate. And so you might want to add color. You know, again, I just cannot stress this enough. Coming back to your needs, how will the area be used? And second of all, what we call them at the UC Master Gardeners a site analysis. What are you starting with, right? How much sun is there? What is your soil like? How much water are you willing to use? How much maintenance, how much time do you want to put into this space? All of these things come into play when it comes to deciding what to do with any space in a garden, including a lawn you're replacing. So let's pretend let's look at some different objectives that people might have. The rest of this presentation is really what I call, you know, horticultural eye candy. It's just ideas. It's just ideas to give people some concepts, some starting points. You don't have to take any notes on any of the plants or anything like that, because I'll show you at the end how to access everything on our website. So the first thing is that a lawn certainly doesn't need to be manicured to be attractive. We're seeing this look more and more, sort of where there's a soft green median strip in this case, or I mean, excuse me, sidewalk strip. And it just has a nice soft look. One of the plants that can achieve that is one called Carex texensis. And I do want to mention one thing. For anybody who is going to say, you know, take the plunge and decide to replace their lawn, if you do order plants or so forth to replace it, please be sure to use the botanical names when you order them. Using common names can be a little dangerous because so many plants have multiple common names. So I'm just throwing that out there as a little tip. But anyway, back to Carex texensis. This plant only grows 4 to 6 inches tall. It doesn't use a whole lot of water. You can mow it once a year. It's just a small clumping grass, very handy. Diamondia. Diamondia is an extremely tough plant. It just hugs the ground very tightly. It's deep rooted, has little flowers that appear. It's really great between stepping stones because it's so tight to the ground, and it pretty much tolerates drought and everything else, cold, salt spray, poor soils. It's a very, very tough plant. And as you can see, it has kind of a nice light grayish tone. I have actually even seen, I don't recommend this, but I've actually seen situations where cars run over a corner of an area on Diamondia, and the Diamondia actually has survived. I don't encourage, I was saying. Zoysia De Anza is a grass that's used on golf courses and sports fields, and it's basically looks, you know, like a conventional lawn. It just has lower water needs. It also tolerates heat and surprisingly shade, which most grasses, conventional grasses, do not care for. And then there's this lovely low blue Carex flacca, a blue sedge. And it's kind of nice because it gives sort of a little bit of a different tone, you know, instead of that deep or medium green, it's this attractive blue-green color. In frost-free areas, it stays evergreen, or I should say ever blue-green. It spreads by but it's not invasive, right? It's not going to like take over your garden. And, you know, you can mow it a couple of times a year, whatever, or just let it get a little bit taller, depending on the look that you're. And then Festuca rubra, the red fescue. This is a grass that I see quite often in Marin. And this is the one we were looking at earlier next to that sidewalk strip, excuse me, as well. This one likes a little bit cooler areas. I see this more often in southern Marin, because in hot areas, hot summer areas, it's going to need a little bit of shade so it doesn't kind of dry out too much. It doesn't need a ton of water, but it's definitely going to need a little bit more when it's hot. And one of the selling points for this ornamental grass as well is that it can take a little bit of shade, which is nice, and still give you that lush look. And this is always kind of a surprising one for folks, because we've been trying to take this plant out of our lawns for decades. This is good old clover, Trifolium repens. An amazing lawn replacement that is so easy because you literally can just throw out seed. It takes center shade. It stays low to the ground. You can mow it if you want. It actually helps the soil by adding nitrogen. It's drought tolerant. It stays green all year. Doesn't matter any type of soil. It attracts bees. Those little white flowers you see in the photo attract bees. And as an added bonus, your pets are not going to leave any marks on this lawn. So it's kind of funny. It's sort of this forgotten alternative, but it's very effective. And there's been a newcomer, actually looks a lot like clover, that's been developed called Carapia. And this is a very fast growing, 1 inch tall, sterile evergreen plant that's a really excellent nectar source for butterflies and bees. And it has very, very deep roots. So that's really great for erosion. So on hillsides and so forth, it can be very valuable. And this has been used in some really tough places, highway shoulders, rooftop gardens, can't get more exposed than that, right? Public utility areas, commercial properties. This one can really take a beating. And it's a newer product, so it's kind of exciting to see this coming on. And this is one of the places actually where Carapia is available. And this outfit is called Delta Bluegrass. They have lots of native and non-native grass blends, and very versatile, a really nice assortment that goes for sun and shade and so forth. One example of this is at of a Delta Bluegrass sod, native sod blend, is at the Marin Art and Garden Center. Right when you enter, if you go to the right to their habitat garden, on the left, there's a grassy area, and that is a native grass blend. And last I saw it, it was still looking pretty good. That was put in a number of years ago. So that's one place to consider among others. And this is one of the others, called Pacific Sod No Mow. And this is a blend of these different fescue grasses. And one of the cool things about Pacific Sod is, that organization I should say, is on their site they have a sod selection wizard, and it's sort of fun. You can go in and plug in the nature of your particular site, and they will recommend a sod that they think is good for you. So if you want something very low water, and then they will let you know what they think will work. So let's say you want a grassy look, but you don't need to walk on it. There are so many options, and I'm going to show you just a few. Carex pansa, see this around town all over the place. This one needs water to get established, but then it requires very, very little, and that's the case with California native plants. This one grows around 6 inches tall, and it spreads around 2 feet by rhizomes. And rhizomes are the little roots underground that kind of go out, but as 2 feet is not going to, again, take over your garden, right? And if it's in a container, like this plant on the right, then it certainly can't exceed the confines of the container. This gives kind of a nice meadow look for both coastal and drier microclimates. It's extremely versatile, great little grass. And a little bit larger version is Carex tumulicola, also called the foothill sedge. This is a California native plant. I see it all over. One of its selling points is that it looks very similar in sun or part shade. And sometimes that can be a challenging situation. Say if you have, the front of your house goes in and out of sun and shade. It's nice sometimes to have a plant that will look consistent across that. And that's not always easy to find. So this is one that fits the bill. It stays about 2 feet tall and wide. It works in wet or dry soil. It's drought tolerant once you get it established. It's just a beautiful, easy, and reliable grass. I want to mention one thing for those who are in the know. This is not the same as Carex divulsa, which is called the Berkeley sedge. They look a whole lot alike. But Carex divulsa, the Berkeley sedge, it is a spreader. It tends to spread, so you're going to find it in other areas of your garden. So I just mentioned that for folks. Calamagrostis foliosa. This is a lovely, lovely grass. The photo on the right there is taken in my garden. It's native to the California coastal scrub, which means the areas, on the coast, and a little bit inland. But it's a beautiful, dense, mounding grass with gray-green tones, a little bit of purple tones in the blades of grass in the fall, and sometimes through winter. Like sun, doesn't need much, little or no summer water at all once it's established. Absolutely beautiful grass. And if you want a larger California native or a larger look for a grass, you've probably all seen this around as well. This is the Muhlenbergia rigans, the deer grass. It's a larger scale. Kind of goes through an awkward teenage phase where it looks like it's it just sticks straight up. Some of these, some of the blades and the inflorescence, it just looks a little funny. But then it quickly fills in to be a 2 to 3 foot beautiful mound of grass that really just stays about the same. I have some at my house I've had for years, and doesn't take any maintenance hardly at all. You can water it a couple of times a month once it's established, and you're good to go. Very easy and dependable. And finally, the Festuca glauca. Here's another blue option, and you've probably seen this around town as well. Has this beautiful, striking blue-green tones. Stays under a foot tall. It can be in full sun on the coast, and here again in inland. So if you're, say, in Novato or in a hot summer area of San Rafael, you'd probably want to put this so that it has a little bit of shade in the hottest times of the day. It's drought tolerant once it's mature. Doesn't even like a whole lot of wet soil. It can be a little short-lived. So maybe after 5, 6, 7 years, you might have to replace some of it and start losing a little bit. So Festuca glauca. Okay, and so what if you want to eat what was where your lawn was? Then putting raised beds is an excellent option. Here you can completely see how somebody basically just went right over their lawn. In this case, those raised beds really are like sheet mulching or sheet composting. There's not going to be any grass growing underneath those raised beds. So, and you could put cardboard, where the little gravel path is, if you put a layer of cardboard underneath that to help snuff out the grass. You could put gravel or whatever right over it. So this is a pretty cool way to have an instant edible garden. And somebody who's done it right in the ground. You could easily see this having been a lawn, and now they've turned it into a very productive edible garden. And of course, edible gardens are not exactly a low maintenance endeavor, but they're wonderful and so satisfying. For those of us who enjoy that type of gardening. So of course, that would be a decision that you would make back in that objective phase. You know, again, how much time do I have to spend on this area of my garden? And so let's just say it's evergreen you're after. You just want to put something there and forget about it, right? There's so many choices. I mean, I can just list 1,000. Here's a Teucrium. This is called the trailing germander. Beautiful bee-loving plant. Drought tolerant once mature. It's just going to stay lovely. You could maybe put a few boulders in there or rocks or something, and it would just be a gorgeous display. Baccharis pilularis, Pigeon Point. This is the so-called coyote bush. This is an extremely important wildlife plant in California. And I want to stress, when I say wildlife, I'm not necessarily talking about deer. Deer don't tend to eat this, so that's a benefit. But it's one of the best choices for attracting all the good bugs, and bees and etc. It stays 1.5 to 2 feet tall, but it really spreads out 10 to 12 feet wide. So you can see how valuable this could be to cover a slope or any wide expanse. It has little white flowers in fall that are not they're not showy at all. And it's just a super tough, super important California native plant. Same with the madrones. Anything in the madrone family, which goes by the name of Arctostaphylos. There are huge Arctostaphylos, the madrone tree, and there are very low growing, tight ground hugging madrones or manzanitas. They're California native plants. They're extremely important in winter when many of them bloom, because it's one of the first plants that our bees use. Pacific mist is great for coastal areas. Emerald carpet is another one that grows about 1 foot tall and 8 feet wide. That's great for inland areas where it gets hot in the summer. It's absolutely adored by hummingbirds, and it's just an absolutely beautiful plant. So many choices in the Arctostaphylos family. And if you love color, of course, we could go on. I could show you so many photos, but let's just look at a couple. You could opt for hot colors or cool colors. You could certainly go crazy with succulents, which is so exciting to see how popular they've become in the last few years. This is a front yard that's near my house. It's just talk about a low maintenance yard. And think about if that little patch to the left on that yard in front of the house were grass. What a pain it would be to have to mow that, right? Versus just having this beautiful spread of these colorful unthirsty succulents. So always a nice choice. And here again are some really lovely ground covers. This is creeping thyme. There's, you know, these are names that you see often at the nursery: verbena, lantana, coreopsis. They're all very, very easy plants to grow. And then again, one more plug for California natives. I can't stress enough how important having as many California native plants in our gardens as possible, because they, you know, they grew up here, right? They were born here, and all of the beneficial insects and pollinators co-evolved with them. And it's the quickest and the best way to get to increase biodiversity in your garden. And speaking of that, here's a couple of examples of some habitat gardens. As you can see, they usually feature many lovely flowering plants. Bottom left here, you can see how this could have been a lawn that would have been replaced. It's just so much more interesting to have all of this color and texture instead of a lawn. You could also create a lovely path through an area that was a lawn. You know, again, the plants on either side of this path are very low water, low maintenance plants. And it has this nice naturalistic look. And you'll notice that the path allows rain to soak through, right? And we're always needing to stay cognizant of that, right? So we want water to slow it, to spread it, and to sink it, right? To keep our groundwater recharged. It's extremely important. We want to avoid having it just run down the drain and into the storm drain and out to the bay. And so if you just want to spruce up your entry, like we saw perhaps like with that succulent garden, here's one you can see where this could have been just a plain lawn. And, you know, it probably wasn't so easy getting those boulders delivered, but it can be done. And this is an extremely low maintenance, I would call very interesting entry garden for this house. Quite lovely, kind of a woodland effect. And here's something where a person chose not to have conventional grass, but just chose a few ornamental grasses. This probably has a total of 4 or 5 species of plants just repeated all over, and very, very low maintenance. And finally, if you need a place to sit down, there are lots of ways to put in patios, and so much depends on your budget here. You could just put, you know, gravel is a nice, a beautiful, low-cost alternative. You know, going for a patio, sort of like at the bottom right, is, you know, a more expensive endeavor. But regardless, these are all great options if you need a sitting area where your lawn was. You know, and look at how interesting that is. I could completely see this as a lawn there that you would have to maintain and mow and move chairs around and so forth. And here it's just this beautiful contrasting space next to all that lush greenery. And a quick reminder that you don't have to give up all your water, but just to use it wisely instead, right? One little fountain, one little water feature in your garden will, you can't believe how beneficial that is to birds and hummingbirds and other creatures that we want to invite into our gardens. Because again, creating habitat is providing the food, water, and shelter that all of these living things need. And so a little water feature helps with that. And here's a big project, less lawn, more pond. This is certainly not something that you're going to get done in a weekend, but it's sort of a long-term goal for many is to have a pond that is naturally balanced using plants and so forth, but that is a big project. And a couple of other creative ways to replace a lawn. fun play area for the kids. I can tell you, my kids are grown now, but when they were young, they spent a lot of time just riding their little things around and playing on our patio versus the lawn. So you can do all sorts of interesting things with that. And finally, you could also create your own secret little garden getaway. Again, a lot more interesting sitting there than sitting on a patch of grass. So there you go. And I'm going to show you, if you go to the UC Marin Master Gardener website, and you go to choose plants, which actually right now is right on the home page, right when you land, you'll see something that says choose plants. If you click on that, you will find this page, which this top area, right plant, right place, the key to success, just summarizes what we just discussed. But down here, if you scroll down, you will see all sorts of plant lists. And all of these are separate lists that you can actually even print out. So let's look at one. I'm just going to show you this one, for instance.
It's still on your PowerPoint, so.
Ah, shoot. All right. Well, then let me share this other page. Okay. Let's see here. Bear with me 1 minute here. Okay, everybody can see this? This look good, Franklin?
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can see it now. Great.
Thank you, thank you. So this is a UC Marin Master Gardener webpage called Choose Plants. And it's right on the home page of our website. And if you scroll down on it a little bit, you'll see that we have many, many lists, plant lists. And these are all live links. And I have a feeling that if I click on this, you are not going to see a list. Can you see a new list or no?
Yes.
Oh, you can. Okay, great. So this gives you, this is walkable lawn alternatives. We just talked about a few, many of these. I've actually a couple of extras in here. There's a Carex flacca, the Carex pansa, etc. So you can scroll through these, and if you're interested, look into them further. So that's where we are with, so that is the conclusion of my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing and go back to video. Okay, so then Joe or Franklin, were there any questions?
Yes, Vanessa writes, if I want to install a lawn with one of the walk-on suggestions, is the suggestion to cover the old lawn with cardboard, add a layer of compost, and then plant the Festuca or clover onto the compost?
No, you'd want to let that bake a little bit, especially if you're doing something by seed. You're going to need to turn that into the really, really healthy soil, and then go ahead and spread seed. If you could just, if you wanted to put a couple of inches of soil, you could do that and mix a little compost in, but I wouldn't do it just straight in the compost.
Okay. Other questions from folks? If you could type them into the chat or the Q&A. So let's see, another question is, do you have a referral to take out my lawn and replace? I have no vision of what to do myself or what to put in its place.
Well, I would say again, I would go back to the Master Gardener site, look at some of those plant lists, see which plants sort of appeal to you, and maybe just pick a couple and start that way. You know, it's not difficult to if you follow this sheet composting process, even just a few plants with a few little you know, rocks or a path or something through it is not a difficult thing to achieve. But I want to reiterate, I want to really emphasize that it so much depends on your needs, right? It depends on what would give you the greatest benefit for that space. Again, it's sort of opening our minds to thinking, okay, this has been a green expanse, and here's how I've used it, right? For instance, before I took out our lawn, I thought, here is this green expanse, and all we do is mow it and look at it, right? We weren't really using it. We didn't have small children anyway, it was just a situation where it was unnecessary. It was sort of a time suck, frankly. We had to mow it, we had to do all these things to it. And I wanted to create habitat in my garden. I wanted to invite hummingbirds and birds and bees and so forth. And so that's why I chose to sheet compost and plant a variety of plants that would meet that objective. So I would encourage you to start again with that objective.
So Marie, another person wrote in, how long do you leave the cardboard on?
The cardboard stays. The cardboard just biodegrades right into the ground. And I want to emphasize, she showed there's a photo in the video where she shows the big roll of cardboard. If you look online, you'll be able to find places to get rolls of cardboard like that, especially if you're doing a large area. It is so incredibly time-saving to use that. And then you just leave that in place. It biodegrades. And the earthworms and so forth underneath absolutely love it. It creates an environment that's wonderful for them. So no, you don't have to lift anything off. That's the beauty of that system.
And
In
then
fact, I'm sorry, Joe, just going to interrupt. I tell my friends that I consider cardboard about as important as a shovel in my garden as a tool. When I have a weed patch or something that's given me a hard time, I often just throw some cardboard on it. You know, maybe if I have some compost, I'll throw a few inches of compost and some mulch. And then I just let it bake for a few months. And usually I've snuffed out that little weed patch.
so another use for Amazon boxes.
Yeah, exactly. Just be sure and double up. Right? You want the edges, you want to be sure that you have, I think, 6 to 8 inches, but as much as possible. You know, I did a really tough area in my yard down along an alley where cars had been driving. So you can imagine how compacted that soil was. I used a couple of layers of cardboard, big mound of compost and some soil and mulch, and I planted right into it. 20 years later, I'm still planting in it. It was a wonderful way, and it just snuffed out all the issues underneath.
Now, can you plant white clover directly in bad soil?
You could, but that's one plant that would probably do okay. You would probably want to try and clear as many weeds as possible just to limit competition from other plants, if you were able to. But yeah, you could give that a try, water it in. And,
Rita wrote in, can you name the long-laying grass again that needs to be mowed once a year? Also, after sheet composting, do you remove it then to plant? And what do you do with compost you removed?
Again, nothing needs to be removed. Anything that you put on, you can plant right into it, or you can wait until it's all, but the cardboard is biodegraded, and you can plant into it, of course, then. So the beauty of this system is it's all bakes in place. Think of it truly as lasagna. It's just baking in place. But I want to be sure I answer the question. So the
there
grass.
was also a grass that you talked about, long-laying grass that mowed once a year.
Well, there are a couple. Festuca rubra is the one that, the red fescue that kind of likes cooler areas. And that one you can just sort of let it flop and be nice and soft. Carex texensis is another one that just gets 4 to 6 inches tall. You could just mow that, yeah, once a year. Those are the two that are coming to mind. There are other ones. I encourage you to go to our site,
right,
and look further into all of those plant lists, because there are a couple that would probably fit that bill.
Now, will sheet mulching work on very hard packed soil?
It will help. Yes, that's a great question. Hard packed soil, compacted soil is soil that has, for instance, one of the things as master gardeners that we often remind people of is after it rains, you want to avoid walking on your soil, right? Because you're going to compact all that air, all that oxygen, all that air that's in our soil that we need gets compacted, and then the soil becomes very hard. So what I would recommend there is for sure using compost. Compost is going to help break that up, bring some air back. But if you were to put a layer of compost down, so in other words, let's say you had a real compacted soil that also had weeds or grass or some nasty stuff that you don't want anymore. Maybe put a little bit of compost down first is what I would do first,
Right.
maybe an inch or two. Then maybe put some cardboard down to help it bake, right? Help it bake. Maybe put a little bit more on there or just load it up with, put a few inches of mulch. Let that sit for a while. Let that sit because it needs those, all of that breakdown of those, all the little critters under our soil, they need to go to work. All that breakdown, they need to go and help break up that soil again.
Anya asks how to obtain large amounts of mulch inexpensively.
Great question. Thank you. Tree companies often provide it for free. And if you get in touch with some local tree places, they might be able, tree pruning places, they might be able to help you out. And I would imagine, I haven't looked into this, but many of us in Marin are having more chipper days these days, right? Through our towns and cities. I would imagine that they may be looking for places to share the wealth, so to speak, as well. So that's what I would recommend.
And then Vanessa asks to clarify, so the suggestion is to cover the old lawn with cardboard and cover with 5 inches of soil and let that kill the lawn for a while and then introduce seed like a Pacific sod fescue blend. She said, I'm only familiar with sheet mulching, the lasagna approach, and never thought of it from the standpoint of low maintenance, low water native grass as a replacement.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny. We're so used to conventional turf grass that we forget that there are so many other grasses out there. Sort of like when I was talking about the native sod blends. And again, it isn't as level or as smooth as a conventional turf, but it might be a little bit bumpier, but uses so much less water and frankly is a little bit more interesting. But to get back to your question, if you want to plant seeds or lay out new sod right away, yeah, you really could I would still put cardboard down, and then you could put, again, 5, 6, 7 inches of soil if you have that difference in grade, right? Because don't forget that you're either going to need to create a little curb around the X of that with some type of, whether you want to use some type of edging or rocks or whatever, but you will be raising the grade right away. But you could put seed right in that, absolutely, directly. And because you have that cardboard down, and because you've come out over the edges so that nothing sprouts on the edges, that lawn will be gone. Yes.
And then Jerry writes in, one concern about lawn-like replacements if you have grandchildren or children is how to avoid flowers containing bees or that attract bees. Yeah,
this is sort of a hard one for me to answer because bees we have a shortage of bees. We've been in some points almost in a crisis situations with bees. We absolutely need bees, and we need to do everything we can to encourage them. And my feeling is that with small children, they're not going to bother them, and the bees aren't going to bother the kids. Is my feeling, and it's to me, it's so important to bring them into environments where there are all these things buzzing around, right? We want them to grow up thinking that that's what's normal, that's what we want, right? It's incredibly valuable. So I don't know if that completely answered your question, but maybe perhaps that's my bias, but it's an incredibly important bees are incredibly important to encourage in our environment.
Betsy asks, are there any varieties of low water trees that you would recommend to fit into a yard replacement strategy?
Low water trees. Sure. Within a mixed, yes, within a mixed, planting. Again, I encourage you to go back and look at those plant lists. There are some that are just trees that are listed. I'm trying to think of a couple off the top of my head. There's a wonderful, for those of you who are familiar with ceanothus, which every spring is the beautiful cobalt blue shrubs, evergreen shrubs. There's a tree version called Ceanothus Ray Hartman. Just gorgeous, gorgeous, every spring, purple, blue, cobalt blooms that again, all the good insects and pollinators love. So there's one that comes to mind. There are so many, there are just so many. There's a native prunus ilicifolia is another native, could be a shrub or a tree, and has white, beautiful spikes of flowers in the spring, if I recall, yeah, spring, and then has these little dingle balls, you know, the fruit that the birds just can't get enough of in the summer and fall. So anyway, I don't want to bore you with too many suggestions, but I really encourage you to go back to those lists and look at them. If you find something that appeals to you, you know, look into it further, especially the size. You know, many of us, especially who love plants, we might say, oh, I have to have that tree. I just love that tree. But, you know, oh, it might get 30 to 40 feet tall and wide, and where am I going to put it? Right. So be sure, and, you know, we all, with master gardeners, we call this right plant, right place, right? Try and get plants that are optimal for your space.
Now, Jane asks if you want to keep some portion of your lawn, what fertilizers are safe and recommended?
Well, one of the best things you can do, you know, I know there's also a wonderful lawn care section website, but one of the best things you can do is just recycle the cuttings. So just when you mow your lawn, be sure you leave on the cuttings. Don't throw them away. Don't put them, you know, just leave them on your lawn, and that's going to help it stay green.
And then, how do you deal with adobe soil?
So by adobe soil, I'm going to assume you mean clay soil, sort of that hard, you put your shovel in and it kind of stops, right? It's not fluffy and dark. And this goes back to the question before, almost about compacted soil or challenging soil. Compost is one of the best things you can, you know, if you're not going to sheet compost, digging in compost over time, keeping a layer of mulch. We have to think about where we're trying to replicate what nature does in general, right? In a forest or in the woods, the leaves fall, they decompose, they create a layer of mulch, and underneath all of that life, all of that teeming food web underneath the earth is keeping the soil beautiful and healthy and ready to get to, you know, sprout new seeds. And when we compact it, or when we have sections that are really very tough to get at, we can try and replicate that process by putting some compost in and a layer of mulch. It's about the best thing you can do for your soil if you're trying to improve it.
And just to double click on that, Marie, this really bad soil is a multi-year project. You do it a couple times every year for several years, because it takes a while to get to turn it around.
Yes, that's true. I will also add that there are California native plants that like clay soil. They want that kind of soil. So that's another way to go as well. In fact, California native purists will say, don't ever put any compost, don't put anything in your soil. You want the native soil, right? So sometimes this is a controversy with native plant enthusiasts. So
that
anyway.
was one of our last presentations, and quite clearly it was, don't add anything to the soil.
Yes, that's and it's great advice. It's great advice, but depending on what you want to plant.
I'm afraid we're almost out of time, but one last question. If you're removing shrubs and you're worried that they had deep root systems, is sheet mulching a way to kind of get a clean bed to start with again?
It can be. Now, I don't want to over promise, you know, I know somebody who actually sheet composted ivy, big nasty ivy problem. Took a couple of years and multiple layers of cardboard and real conscientious piling things up. But this person did not want to dig it out and didn't want to use any chemicals for sure. And it works. So, you know, some plants are more challenging than others, right? I'm going to take Bermuda grass as a classic example. That plant not only spreads like a demon by rhizomes underneath, but it also produces seeds. So if you could, you know, you could put down a barrier and help keep those rhizomes at bay. But in the meantime, it spreads seeds all over before you compost. And so they're going to be coming up and they're going to be jumping into that new bed that you're trying to create. So it's just staying on it, isn't it? You know,
right.
Like Joe said, it can take, sometimes it can take, for the really tough jobs, it can take, you know, a year or two, a couple of years to really try and to make a difference.
So I'm afraid we've hit the magic hour. Marie, you are up for sainthood. You've now done 2 garden Zooms. You're now our record holder for garden Zooms.
It's funny.
And thank you so much.
There were there were a couple really good questions that were down at the bottom. Someone asked about fabric.
Right.
Fabrics.
I'm looking at them. I'm just wanted to be respectful of people's time. Someone asked, can you integrate using landscape fabric with sheet mulching? And I think it's 2 different things, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Most, to the best of my knowledge, most of the landscape fabrics do not biodegrade. And the whole beauty of this system is that you want it to biodegrade.
Right.
You want it, again, you're cooking it. You're cooking with this process. And landscape fabric is typically to block something, but not to improve the soil. It just wants to block, you know, everything. So maybe it's good for if you're going to put stone on top of it. But even then, in my opinion, I would always opt for something that's going to improve the soil.
And are there, because this connects to one of our earlier classes, what mulches would you recommend for a slope that are fire safe?
Slopes are tough with mulch, but the recommendation for fire smart is to not have any combustible mulch 5 feet from your house. From 5 to 30 feet, you want to try and incorporate some non-combustible horizontal surfaces. What do I mean by that? Maybe some places of flagstone, some rock, some stones, some gravel areas, paths, whatever you can incorporate that will interrupt the flow of a fire. So if a fire is starting from the outer reaches of your garden, coming towards your house, you want to have something that's going to interrupt that line of fire. 30 feet from your house. So incorporated within that, those horizontal surfaces, a little bit of using larger chunks of mulch, 2 inches deep. We want to try to avoid anything more than 2 inches deep is probably a good way to go. 30 feet and beyond, large chunks of wood mulch are fine. On hillsides, it can be challenging. You might have to create some little mini terraces here and there, especially where plants are planted, to try and keep it from sliding down. And I know that's often a challenge for people. So that's the best advice I can give on that.
Right. I think there's some other questions, but I'm afraid we're almost out of time. Last comment. When you're thinking about this, it's an interesting combination of how to transform a garden and how to rebuild soil.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like the core of your thinking is trying to do both at the same time in a way that gives you as many options to plant. But you're really building the soil rather than devastating it by tearing everything out or sterilizing it. Is that basically the mindset?
It is, and again, if a person is going to replace their lawn and they're not going to plant into it, then you can, you know, again, like the photo I showed that had the raised beds, right? Same idea. You're starving that lawn of light, and that's what's going to be its demise. And in its place, you've put something that you would prefer there. Again, if you're going to put a shed where your lawn is, just put the shed on the lawn. It's going to kill the lawn, right? So it's getting the idea that, right, just as you're saying, Joe, if you want to improve your soil, if you want to plant something different, this is a great way to go, because you kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? If your objective, again, is something different, then you can think about something maybe even simpler. Right.
So for example, if you were going to move towards an artificial lawn, you don't need to sheet mulch.
No.
Because you're going to seal it off anyway. Right.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because I see these artificial lawns going in, and I get it. I get it. There are, you know, this is a subjective, this is to everybody's what they like or what they don't like. But when you see how many wonderful living choices there are, then gosh, if I can do something where I'm going to be a part of the greater ecological surroundings versus putting something that's, I guess they're made out of plastic or rubber or whatever, instead of that, then gosh, I would encourage everyone to look at the alternatives when you're thinking about that.
That was kind of a setup, Marie, I'm sorry. And then last question. Jessica,
I figured, Joe.
I know, Jessica had planted clover in an already established lawn. It's doing well. However, it still needs a lot of water to stay green in the summer. And there are many weeds. Should she start over and cover the lawn and replant with clover?
It sounds like it. It sounds to me like the grass might be an issue.
Right.
Like
Right.
that lawn still wants the water. So I would be tempted to start over. Yeah.
And there's
Because
a question
clover should not need a lot of water.
no. And then is there a way to deter hornets I'm not sure how this relates to sheet mulching. I think this is just a general question on hornets.
Yellow jackets?
Yes.
Yes. In fact, we just had an article that has some suggestions for that in the leaflet, which is our e-newsletter that we put out for the Master Gardeners. And so I encourage you to go to the website. If you just put in yellow jackets, that's going to come up. And there's some good tips. One of the things is, of course, they build nests underground or in different places. Don't disturb the nests. Do not disturb the nest. This is one place where you likely will need a professional
Right.
to come in and help you out. The thing about yellow jackets that makes them so, I'll just call it nasty, is that they not only can sting, but they can bite.
Right.
And they don't die, right? They do it all. They
Right.
do it all and they hurt. So for those of us who have interrupted a nest, it is no fun at all.
Right.
So, yeah.
So to summarize, Marie, this lawn replacement has a whole series of benefits. Sheet mulching is a strategy to transform the soil and make it ready for whatever you want to do next. And it's a way of removing the lawn and building the soil at the same time, pretty much without disrupting the biodiversity, what's underground already.
Correct. Well said. Yes. Yes.
Wonderful.
And not all, and it's not just, it doesn't just pertain to lawns.
Right. It could be anything.
It can be used, again, like the example I used, it's true. I mean, I hang on to boxes so that I can just slap cardboard down on weedy areas and, and snuff them out. It's a wonderful tool.
Now, last question before we ring off. You mentioned getting rid of ivy.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like half of Marin is covered by ivy.
I know.
So can you give us the 30-second primer on how to suppress ivy over a 5-year period?
Well, you could use the methods that we're talking about now, sheet composting. The other thing is be diligent about pulling it. Be diligent, because here's another one where it's spreading all over. And when you see those big, like, I don't call them shrubs of ivy, and they all have the flowers, and birds are eating those, and they are spreading ivy all over, way beyond your neighbors, then the next town over, they're taking it everywhere. So be diligent about pulling it and don't let it flower.
But you can sheet mulch it as a starting part, but you're still going to end up pulling a lot of ivy.
Yes, I would say, again, I do know somebody who has sheet composted ivy. It was a long process, and she's an extremely diligent gardener.
Marie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone for attending our garden Zoom. Franklin, when is our next garden Zoom?
So our next garden Zoom will be on August 15th with James Gurish, and she'll be talking about ordering bulbs. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you again, Marie, for giving us some great ideas on how we can replace our lawns.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And again, thank you, Joe, for helping me out, and I will see you guys soon. So you guys all have a great afternoon, and there will be a follow-up email with the Marin Master Garden survey, as well as links to the recordings from today. So everybody have a great weekend, and we'll all see you soon. Thanks.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.